Melissa, might you be ready?
I'm ready if you are.
Chief, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Policy Committee regular scheduled meeting of Thursday, March 10th, 2016 at 5:30 in these chambers. With us this evening, we have Director Mitchell and Director Orzali, also members of this committee. We'll start with a public opportunity to discuss items of public interest within the committee's scope, including items on or not on the agenda. And I know this is a huge time where many people line up at the microphone, but apparently tonight not the case. So seeing no public comment, I'll move for approval of the consent agenda. Gentlemen?
I would move the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay. Any other questions, comments relative to that? Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Director Orzali,
Aye.
and Director Gould.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We'll move on now to action summary minutes for November 12th, 2015, a millennium ago, when this committee last met. Any questions or comments relative to the minutes of that meeting? Corrections, additions, subtractions, deletions?
That was the consent agenda.
Right, okay, so we've now moved the consent through because it was listed under that action item. We'll now go to action items. Election of officers. I'll entertain a motion to elect a chair.
I would make a motion to nominate Director Gould as the chair of this committee for the year of 2016.
Second.
We clearly call your mental health into question. Any other questions, other candidates? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Orzali,
Aye.
and Gould.
Abstain.
Motion passes.
We'll now call for election of a vice chair to the Policy Committee.
I would make a motion that we have Director Orzali be the vice chair for the year of 2016.
Definitely look forward to seconding that motion. Any other questions or comments from the electee?
No.
Okay. Condolences then. In that regard, let's call the roll.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Orzali,
Abstain.
and Gould.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Let's now move on to the action item of importance, and that's the travel and conference policy. Deputy Chief Holbrook, it looks like this is your item.
It is. Directors, good evening. Christopher Holbrook, Deputy Chief of Administration. We have a new copy of the travel and conference policy that's being handed out to you tonight.
Okay.
It is a rare exception that a policy will make it before the policy committee twice, and that's what happened in this case. It came to before you in November. Some edits were recommended. Unfortunately, because we haven't had a meeting in so long, the members of this committee had changed, so we decided to bring it back before this committee before we go to the full board with a recommendation. It seemed odd to recommend to the full board that the policy committee recommended it when, in fact, those people were different. So with that, you have 3 yellow highlighted changes within this policy. The 2 that are on page 2 were recommendations that came from this committee. But what I actually want to address is the one that's on page 1, and that is travel and conference for, it's about transparency for members of the board and the fire chief. And what we did was actually change this so that it was more reflective of exactly what occurs. The way that it was written before, it would have taken an action item of the board to approve travel, and that's just not the way that you do business. You do business in open conversation about where you're going and how often. So we wrote it into the policy that yourself or the fire chief would have that conversation in a public meeting for transparency reasons. Anybody who wants anything can always PRA it relative to expenses and anything else. But what we want was transparency in the meeting about where it is that you're going and what you're doing. So same thing for the fire chief. His comes out in the fire chief's report. It does not take an action item of the board for him to be approved for travel. So we wrote it that way so that it made more sense. So with that, those are the edits that were requested for this policy. I will answer any questions that you have.
Members of the Policy Committee relative to this change that's been described. Chief, I have one. I know that when we originally talked about some of these changes, and particularly I'm thinking about item 6B, I know that oftentimes when we travel, we're limited, trying to get a hotel rate that falls within the per diem amounts, and sometimes that's not available.
Yes.
Hotels specifically work those numbers to where sometimes that's not available. And I remember us discussing about the fact that we do not want members of this organization being put in a position where safety becomes a consideration, because I know enough about how conferencing works to know that eventually you might be outside of a particular bubble that the conferencing hotels, have come together on. And what I'd not like to see is that one of our members is being required to leave that safety zone, so to speak, where there is the conference hotel or the trickle-down hotel, simply because the rate doesn't meet some of that. And it looks like to me, you can get that waived, but it needs to be expressly provided.
Correct, and the idea there was, so there's actually twofold. One, the safety bubble, if you will, is a very real thing, and we acknowledge that. In addition to that, it's not prudent to have somebody driving for 90 minutes.
Correct.
And wasting a significant portion of your day in a scenario that would duplicate this. The idea is that if you do some research and find that you can't get GSA rate within a certain area, all you need to do is just list out, I've checked X amount of hotels within within a reasonable geographic zone, and was I not able to book, thus I went for this hotel at the higher rate. As long as we have justification, that's all that it takes for.
I would imagine too that oftentimes it's better for us to leave our employees in the host facility because they're coming out of meetings or seminars later on in the evening, and we don't need them traveling, as you've mentioned, any great length. And so oftentimes these host facilities are a little higher than the GSA per diem, but it's more prudent for us to do that versus shipping them all over the place where there may or may not be restaurants or what have you. So-
Correct, and the host facility plus a taxi fare, I might as well have stayed at the host facility. So, yes.
Okay, all right, other questions?
Yes.
Just one, under section 8,
Yes.
there's a reference there to common carriers. And I'm assuming now that we're including things like Uber under common carriers for taxis and transportation.
That is correct, sir. What we did not want to do was list a company by name. And
Right.
so, yes, Uber would be a perfect example. They are used all the time within the confines of our policy.
Great, thank you.
Okay, this is an action item this evening, so at this point, it sounds to me like what I need is a motion to approve this new revised policy so that we can move it to the full board for consideration. Do either one of you two like to do that for me?
I move that we, whoops.
I move that we put this, we agendize this and move it forward to the whole board.
Okay.
I would
thank you.
second that motion.
Okay, we have a first and a second on that. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Orzali,
Aye.
and Gould.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Thank you, Chief, for that. Our next scheduled, it looks like we do actually have a next scheduled event. Our next scheduled meeting will be April 14th, 2016. If there's no other further questions, we'll adjourn this session of the Policy Committee. Okay, thank you.